Welcome to Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, the podcast standing with you from a family like yours, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B and in partnership with Balancing Life's Issues. This episode is brought to you by Medexus Pharma, the company behind Ixinity. At Medexus, our commitment to the communities we serve enables our focus, improving lives one patient at a time. I'm your host, Kai, and we are so excited to be bringing you expert interviews and member impact stories that highlight the ever-growing community at the Coalition for Hemophilia B, CHB for short, where the mission is to strive to make quality of life the focal point of treatment for people with hemophilia B and their families through education, empowerment, advocacy, and outreach. Today's episode is all about women who have hemophilia B and how they face unique challenges. These can include underdiagnosis, variable symptoms influenced by hormonal changes, and specific reproductive health risks. These challenges require tailored medical care and greater awareness with the healthcare community. Knowing this, it's imperative that we emphasize the importance of advocacy for better recognition and treatment of hemophilia B in women, highlighting the role of support networks and resources available to women in the hemophilia B community to improve their quality of life and health outcomes. And to help us learn more about these unique challenges, we've invited Daniel Nance, MD, hematologist at Banner MD Anderson Cancer Center in Arizona. Dr. Nance specializes in classical hematology, and particularly in hemophilia and women's health with a bleeding or clotting disorder about women's unique experience in the hemophilia B community. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Nance.
Thanks so much for having me, Kai. I'm really delighted to be here and to be able to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges women with hemophilia B have.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to have you. And I think I just wanted to kick this off by asking like a really broad question just about diseases in general, but how do diseases differ in men than in women?
That is a great question, Kai. And one of the key reasons why physicians who are taking care of patients with hemophilia B, especially persons who have the possibility of menstruation, can look different. Diseases in women look different than they do in men. For any of those diseases on the X chromosome. The X chromosome has a different expression pattern in women than men. Men have only one X chromosome. So if you have a mistake on your X chromosome, it's going to show up pretty strongly in men. In women, Mother Nature has the potential of having two possibilities. And in women, that is not discarded. So women have, the potential to have that other X chromosome balance out a problem. If there's a problem on one X chromosome, the other one can jump in and help. That doesn't always happen, and it depends on how well a physician was trained in this process of what we call X chromosome inactivation that shows up in any woman who has a disease that falls on the X chromosome. And hemophilia, especially hemophilia B, is a perfect example of how X chromosome inactivation can really make it challenging to make a diagnosis for women. And actually, I would just recommend that folks check out the CDC website about X chromosome inactivation to learn more. But in a, kind of in a quick summary there, if you're a male and you have hemophilia, or anything on the X chromosome, it's going to show up because you only have one possibility.
Right.
But in women, the factor levels or whatever it is, if it's muscular dystrophy or color blindness, it's a mixture in women. So part of the body will make good factor, part of the body doesn't. And the amounts change from one woman to the next. So
right.
So some women can have factor levels that are 10%, even though they have one good X chromosome, and other women can have factor levels that are 90% or 100%. And so even in the same family who has hemophilia, one girl with the hemophilia gene can have a ton of symptoms, and the other girl can be fine. And we see that in any disease on the X chromosome, that each woman has their own separate genetic lottery when it comes to how much factor they're going to have.
Wow.
Depending on how much of your X chromosome is active with the factor disease, that'll tell how much factor is in the bloodstream. So hemophilia is one of the easiest diseases in which to measure this X chromosome inactivation pattern, and it actually has helped to improve understanding of that in all women diseases and all
Yeah.
women's health.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting you say that because the diagnosis being easy. However, with women, it's underdiagnosed, right? We know that women are often not listened to in the doctor's office, or their symptoms are dismissed. So I think, as we begin to dispel this myth that women are only carriers of the disease, I mean that's an outdated line of thinking, correct?
You're spot on, Kai. This confusion around what is happening in women and why it looks so different from one woman to the next has led to, a lot of underdiagnosis and actually a lot of confusion in women themselves, right? So, when it comes to taking care of women with a hemophilia B mutation, there are challenges for me as a clinician. Women might not recognize their bleeding symptoms
Mm-hmm.
just because their bleeding symptoms are so different in men.
Yeah.
But also, providers might not be thinking about bleeding symptoms in women just because they weren't taught the right way. So the
Mm-hmm.
more we learn about it, the more we teach each other, the more we look at our own bodies and figure out what symptoms we have, then the more we can be aware of these big differences in how the diseases look from men to women. I think that, when it comes to women and hemophilia, there's been a lot of problems both from providers and patients recognizing symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really this like, turning of the circle each time, learning
Yeah.
more and more.
Yeah. So, and I think what we're talking about now are like these diagnostic challenges, right? So even if it's yourself or if it's a loved one, recognizing symptoms in somebody and getting them to the proper place for care. And if you get to that doctor and your symptoms are dismissed, what's that next step, right? Like who am I then going to? Is it a second follow up? Is it an organization like the Coalition for Hemophilia B? Like as we begin to advocate better for ourselves around this disease, what are those steps beyond the doctor's office that we could be taking to make sure that we are getting properly diagnosed?
So, Kai, here's the really interesting thing. I have been attending hemophilia conferences for 25 years now, and a lot of women go to the hemophilia conferences, especially the Coalition for Hemophilia B, and talk amongst themselves. And what happens is when we're at those conferences and we're all together, we can compare our experiences.
Hmm.
And that's a lot of places where women really first understand that the symptoms of heavy menstrual bleeding, that those terrible bruises that they have, those swollen joints that aren't always as bad as their male affected relatives,
Mm-hmm.
that those symptoms are bleeds, that they're being recognized by learning from each other that those symptoms are bleeds. Then they'll take that information they got from the community and they'll take it to their physician and they'll say, you know what, I'm having this symptom.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, it sure is annoying. I'm not able to go to school. How is it impacting my life?
Right.
I'm
Right.
not able to walk. I had, if I could just talk about this one woman,
Sure.
completely heartbreaking situation. She was going to a hemophilia treatment center and she had bleeding symptoms and was treated not with factor. She was treated with different product for her symptoms of bleeds, and that product would make her so sick that she wouldn't be able to get up and finish taking care. Like she
Mm-hmm.
could cook dinner for her family, but that she couldn't help with the dishes, or
Right.
she could maybe lift the laundry, but somebody would have to carry it
Right.
around. So she wasn't able to function because of her bleeding symptoms.
Hmm.
And she was basically asking me if she could just try factor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, gosh, that's like a lot of bleeding symptoms.
Right.
Let's put you on prophylaxis.
Mm-hmm.
And that woman's life was transformed because
Wow.
her bleeding symptoms were treated, and she was able to eventually even go out for walks with her
Yeah.
family at night. Her daughter's depression lifted because her mother wasn't always sick. Her daughter was worried that her mom was actually going to die
Mm-hmm.
from these symptoms that were so debilitating. So maybe it's just heavy menstrual bleeding, but maybe it's a lot worse and it's a
Right.
lot stronger. And so knowing that it's great to have your your friends help encourage you to seek treatment is one thing. But then when you get to the physician's office, you have to be able to be heard. You have to
Right.
have, hey, my physician heard me that those symptoms were interrupting my life.
Yeah.
And so, when we're with our friends at the Hemophilia B, then we also need to then be organized and prepared when we get to our physician's office. And I think that's where things break down for a lot of women. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where it's tough for me as a
Yeah.
physician to be able to say, gosh, why aren't all my colleagues doing this? Why
Right.
isn't every physician listening to patients and recognizing those symptoms? And so what I've wanted to spend a little time with, Kai, is preparing women who have these symptoms for when they get to their physician's
Right.
office, because once you recognize it, it's just the first step.
Absolutely. And we're gonna get to those tips. We're gonna wrap up this conversation with that checklist that you can have to walk into a doctor's office. But I just wanted to highlight what you're saying is that the importance of community, right? The importance of coming together with like-minded individuals or people who are going through the same thing to share those stories, because that's ultimately where you're going to find the strength to then go approach the doctor's office to get that proper diagnosis. And that heartbreaking story you told that turned into heartwarming, right? Like we can turn
Yeah.
things around for you with this idea of community. The goal of this podcast is to share this message of how we can advocate for ourselves and educate ourselves. So I know earlier you mentioned this list of or I don't know, the pep talk that we all need when we walk into that doctor's office. But if you could just give us a few tips on when we actually get to the doctor's office to make sure that we are advocating for ourselves and that we appropriately navigate whatever conflict resolution within ourselves in order to have a difficult conversation, if need be.
Yeah, thank you, Kai. I think that the biggest thing that we can do as individuals going into our healthcare provider is, number one, to have an agenda, have a list. What do you want? So when I go into the clinic and I say, how can I help you today? And the patient doesn't know, then I know what I can say to help move
Mm-hmm.
to help move that clinic visit alone. But if a person comes in to me and says, I've got a procedure coming up and I need a procedure plan, gosh, I know exactly what I need to do to help that patient.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to see your doctor, what do you need? What do you want? And did you write down your list of questions you have? Do you need a refill? Can you share with the doctor every time you had a bleed? Some people will take pictures of their bruises and bring those into the clinic. So do you have a record somewhere, and can you bring it with you to the clinic? One of the most I think powerful things, especially as a provider, it's hard for me to want to spend time waiting for someone to scroll through their phone for a long time to find their pictures. So if you could pre-organize those into a
Mm.
folder before you come, so it's right there.
Yeah.
It's at your fingertips.
Yep.
That it's all organized. It's right there. So you have your list of things you need to get done. You have a calendar that you can scroll through, or you've created a spreadsheet with the labs that you're worried about, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then if your provider doesn't give you the opportunity, you can say, oh, hold on just 1 second. So our plan is going to be this. I'm going to go to the lab and get my labs, and I'm going to get this imaging of my knee that's been hurting, and we don't think it's a bleed, but we're going to double check. And then when are we going to follow up? When are we going to talk
Mm-hmm.
about what to do next? And making sure that you know what the plan is, and that the provider knows what the plan is, so that when you leave the visit, you know that you got what you needed to get, and you know what your next steps are.
That's so great. And I think, just to reiterate, writing it down, because when you're going to get there, maybe you're really feeling the symptoms that day. Maybe you're feeling really flustered. That's when you start to forget things, right? So your ability to reference something that's like, hey, no, I need answers on these things, I think is just great advice for anybody who's going into a doctor's office to be able to advocate for themselves. So I would be remiss if we did not mention, your work with the Coalition for Hemophilia B. So if you could just kind of shout out, the types of connections and maybe a story or something from your work there, and maybe just tell us a little more about your connection to that organization.
The first time that I remember really doing work with the Hemophilia B community was just a few years ago, actually 2 years ago, and I was recovering from an ankle surgery, and it was a women's conference. And it was just the most loving women's conference I've been to for a really long time. The entire group was just open and curious, and and I feel like I healed as much as I was able to share a little bit of information to the community. And every interaction I have with especially with patients with hemophilia B, which are rare and bleed differently than VWD and hemophilia A, which are so much more common, is that of kindness, curiosity, and just really a willingness to love each other and to share each other's joys and support each other during the sorrows. So I'm really humbled to be a part and to have been asked to help support the advocacy initiatives of the Coalition for Hemophilia B, and as a community member within the hemophilia world, I'm so proud of the work that they're doing.
Well,
so thank you so much to you, Kai, and all of your staff, as well as to the Coalition of Hemophilia B, for having me on the program today.
Oh, that's such a great way to end it. And I appreciate your time. And, this has been the Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, the podcast standing with you from a family like yours, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B and in partnership with Balancing Life's Issues. For more information on upcoming CHB community events, just go to www.hemob.org and click on Get Involved, and then navigate to upcoming events. And once again, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Nance.
You're welcome, Kai. Have a great day.
You too. And until next time, everybody, take care. This episode is brought to you by Medexus Pharma, the company behind Ixinity. At Medexus, our commitment to the communities we serve enables our focus, improving lives one patient at a time. This episode of Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B, is made possible in part by the support of CSL. We thank CSL for their continued commitment to the bleeding disorders community. This episode of Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B, is made possible in part by the support of CSL. We thank CSL for their continued commitment to the bleeding disorders community.